And it goes a little something like
Story time about when a prank went wrong. Okay, so a little info. I was in 4th grade and I took the school bus to reach to the school. Me and my best friend were in the same bus since we live really close to each other. We had a really annoying bus conductor, like the person who manages stuff in the bus, also like the driver's assistant thingy, so he would always tell us not to talk blah blah. One day me and my friend came up with this idea to prank him. So as usual we sat in the bus with all the other students. BTW, the bus dropped me off before my friend. The plan was that we would put a sign at the back of the bus which said "honk if you can read this." Yes, I know it was dumb, and we also added, "This is written by the annoying bus conductor." Okay, that was disrespectful. Anyways, after the bus dropped me at my house, I went at the back and pasted it. The next day we went to school and the principal was sitting there with 2 teachers. We went in her office. At this point we were sure they found out. She showed us the sign and asked, "What's this?" Me and my friend being dumbasses lied and said we didn't know. After a 5 minutes talk we accepted that we did that. And the teachers said they know. I wasn't surprised at all. We said sorry to the conductor and driver and to the teachers. You think it ends here? Nope. The teacher called our parents and we were suspended for 2 days. Don't call me stupid, I was just in 4th grade. Another story by Coffee. Story time about how I got lost in a festival with my little sister. So at that time I was 13 and my sister was 4. My family and I went to this flower festival and it was outdoors. The place was huge. I was walking behind my mum and my sister was with me. I was walking close to my mum since I didn't wanna get lost. The place was really crowded. I stopped to take a picture with my sister and yes, the next thing I knew was that I couldn't see my family. Great. My sister was with me, so after realizing, she obviously started crying. We start looking for my mum and we can't find her. We both were really hungry, so we ate burgers and cotton candy. We really forgot we were lost. After 15 minutes me and my sister were just like, yeah, they'll eventually come find us. So we start roaming around and realize we were not even close to the place we got lost at. Also my phone was dead so I couldn't call. And my dumbass didn't even think of borrowing a phone. After a solid 1 hour of roaming around with my sister we see our family. My mum was crying too and my dramatic sister started crying. Happily ever after.
Short story time of how I almost lost my voice. Sent by Anonymous. Okay, so I was 10 when this happened. I was really clumsy and I tend to fall out, so one night I was running to my mom's room to get my phone back from her, but my brother was playing with water, so water was coming out from the toilet door and I ran still. But then I slipped and fell so hard that my spine was hurting for about 5 days. I was so scared right after I fell that I couldn't even talk. Like I tried to. My mouth opened and all but no sound. I was literally so scared I started crying and then my mom brought me to a hospital and in a few days I could talk again.
Story time about my crazy ex. A few years ago my ex broke into my house. He took all of my clothes and everything in my room but left one nasty crusty thing that I'm not going to say. When my mum found out she legit screamed and had a mental breakdown because she's overprotective about me. The cops were called after he took all my mum's belongings and he didn't get arrested sadly, but he got charged $2 million because of all the things that he took. He wanted to do the nasty with me but I said no. Soon he did the nasty with my 6-year-old sister. It was seriously disgusting. He was freaking 8 years older, but then my sister told the cops and everyone and my sister was scared and crying for help after he did it again. Then cops were called. He was sent to prison for 2 years. He got out 2 years later and did it again, but no one knew. The next day he went to my brother. Then the funny part was when he saw my brother he went like this. "What's up, my guy?" I was with my brother dying from laughing, but soon he did the nasty with me and my mum. I was scared, so I told the cops because I didn't give my consent to do the nasty. Soon he was arrested and now he's still in prison for another 7 years. So now I'm just gonna be happy sorta and try to live my life again and ignore the past and wait for the future to come.
Story time about how I thought something happened to my mum. Sent by Anonymous. So I was 10 and home alone after school. My grandmother dropped me off and my mother was at a training and was supposed to be home by 4 after picking up my brother from daycare. So I got myself some goldfish and sat down to do my homework. When I finished I looked at the clock and it said 4:30. I thought my mother was running late, so I decided to finish the book I was reading. I looked up at the clock again and it was 5 o'clock. I called my mother but it went straight to voicemail. I called again and left a message. I also sent a text. It was now 5:30 and no response. I called my grandmother and told her that my mother was not home yet. Keep in mind my grandma is 5 minutes away. She said to call in half an hour if she was not home. I called my dad, no response. I called my mum again and left a message. I turned on the news since my father works for them so I could see if there was an accident or anything. Half an hour passed and my mother was not home. I called my grandmother and she called my mum. No answer. She and my grandfather drove Tommy house with dinner and I was scared. We all kept our eyes glued to the news. At 8 my mum walked in the door with my brother and I started to cry tears of relief. I asked why she was so late and she said my brother wanted to stay and look at the book fair at his preschool. And there was traffic. I am still scared of staying home alone, so I just stay with my grandma.
Story time about how I found out my high school boyfriend was stalking me for weeks after we broke up. My junior year of high school, I had a super controlling and jealous boyfriend. He would get totally upset and jealous over the smallest thing, and he was so envious of my modeling and acting career. He also tried to control my social life. I couldn't have friends, and I never went out. If I had a photo shoot, he always insisted on going. My family hated the way he treated me. He was also just angry and upset all the time, so even when we hung out, it wasn't a fun time. I decided to break up with him over the phone because I knew if I did it in person, he would have made a scene. Of course, he begged me not to break up with him. I told him I just couldn't handle his jealousy and his envy. He really couldn't take no for an answer, so he would show up to my house and beg me to go for car rides with him because he just wanted to talk. I always said no because I was scared of him. I also called my family's house to see if I was there or not. One day I was driving home from school and I noticed he was right behind me. I texted him to stop following me. He said, "I'm not behind you, that's not me." I literally pulled over, and when I did that, he sped off. Later, he came to my house and tried to force me into his car. So my jealous and controlling ex-boyfriend shows up to my house. Mind you, he had been following me the entire day, and when I told him to stop following me, he said it wasn't him. I heard his car pull up, I went outside and I told him politely to please leave. That's when he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards his car. I opened his car door and literally tried to throw me inside the car. I put my feet up against the car and I pushed myself as hard as I could. I was not gonna let him force me into that car. When he saw how hard I was fighting, he started to cry and he said, "Why can't we just take a ride and talk?" I told him there was nothing to talk about and that he needed to just let me go. He said, "You can't get rid of me that easily." Then he sped off in his car. At the time, I was working at a cafe near my house. So I show up to my job the next day and my boss tells me to go into her office right away. She pulls up camera security footage of the restaurant and then she says, "Tell me if you recognize anyone." Guess who I see? My ex-boyfriend looking through the window 2 hours before the restaurant even opened. Then he went to his car and sat there until I arrived, and when he saw my car pull up, he left really fast. When my shift was over, I walked to my car and I can see my ex hiding behind the tree next to my car. My crazy jealous ex had been stalking me for days and I could see him hiding behind a tree next to my car. I run back into my job and I tell my boss right away. She calls the cops, but they say they can't come unless I've been physically threatened. The rest of the week, I noticed him following me to school and wherever I would go. Saturday comes around and I go back to my job. Once again, my boss tells me to go into her office because she has something to show me. She pulls up more camera security footage and shows me that my boyfriend had been going to my job every single day before it opened to see if I was there. And he would stay for hours waiting in his car. I felt so sick to my stomach. When I get home, I tell my mom everything and then she calls his mom. Well, his mom took his phone and his car away. It was the only way to stop him from following me. Finally, he left me alone. A few years later, I found out he became really good friends with my brother. I came home from school one summer and he actually tried to kiss me in the kitchen several times and I told him no. He didn't speak to me after that. Here's a story time about when my coworker pulled out a knife on me. It sounds so dramatic, but it's true. Back in 2010, I got hired as a waitress at a hookah lounge in Glendale, California. I was trained by the lead server. I'm gonna call her Leslie. Leslie was really cool at first, and we got along pretty well. She was also an aspiring model like me, but the difference was that I had already gotten some modeling work and I had representation, and so she would ask me about how to get an agent, and I would give her as much information as I could. I was very happy to help her. Our main job was to upsell hookahs, and the bosses noticed that I was pretty good at it, so within a few weeks they were congratulating me and being very vocal about how happy they were that I was working there. I could tell that this made Leslie a little bit jealous, and she quickly became very cold towards me. Whenever I entered a room, she would start talking bad about me on purpose so that I could hear her talking bad about me, and because I wouldn't react the way she wanted to, she would get very upset. She began to poison the servers against me and even the cooks in the kitchen. I then got a raise, and the bosses told me in front of her, and this made her even more upset. She clearly had some issues, and I felt bad for her, but it didn't give her the right to treat me like that. This is where it gets scary. Part 2. My coworker, who I'm calling Leslie, was very envious of the fact that I was doing well at the job and that the bosses were happy with me. I had also gotten a raise, and I was making as much money as she was, and she had been there for a very long time. She would talk bad about me as soon as I came into the room, and she would make sure I would hear her, and it got so bad that I would ask her a question and she would flat out ignore me, pretend like I just wasn't even there. I couldn't work like that any longer, so I went up to the bosses and I told them what was happening, and they were not surprised. They basically said, "It's okay, don't worry about it, just ignore her, she'll get over it." And they told me that they were going to talk to her. They told me not to worry, and I went home. The following morning, I wake up early and I go to the hookah lounge because I had the opening shift. As soon as I pull up to the hookah lounge, I see her car parked, and it was the only one there, which told me I was going to be by myself with her. I walk in and I see that she's sitting at a table with one of the other guy servers who's completely in love with her and will do anything she wants. They see me come in and they start walking very fast toward me. She starts yelling that I have cellulite, that I have back knee, that I'm too short, that I'll never make it as an actor. Part 3. My coworker Leslie is yelling at me, telling me I have cellulite, I have back knee, that I'm short, that I'll never make it as an actress or a model, and the guy that's standing right next to her is our coworker, and he's totally in love with her and will do anything she wants. He chimes in every now and then and starts calling me a bitch and other names. She's also doing the same. Every time I would try to say something, they would both interrupt me, and she would just yell louder and louder. I didn't know what to do, so I started walking backwards toward my car. The other coworker, I'll call him Mark. Mark had something in his hand and I couldn't really tell what it was. Then he pulls up his hand and I see that he has a pocket knife. I was ready to poo my pants, you guys. She starts laughing at me because she can tell that I'm really scared, and he's just laughing as well. He called me a rat because I told the bosses about what she did, and she said that this needed to be fixed between her and I, no one else. I got mad and I said, "Well then why do you have Mark here with a knife?" I told her we could just talk about things, and I asked him to leave and he said no. I tried talking some sense into them, but they just were not listening to me whatsoever. They were just so angry. Part 4. So I'm standing in the parking lot and my coworker Leslie is yelling her face off at me, and my other coworker Mark has a knife in his hand. I'm sobbing at this point because I'm terrified. Obviously, who wouldn't be? I managed to get the car door open and I slid inside really quick. I closed the door behind me, and then she started banging on the window and she told me to come out. I didn't. I turned on my car and I sped away. I called my bosses right away and I was like, "Look, this just happened. Check your security cameras." They checked the security camera and they saw the whole thing. They said they were in shock, that they didn't know that she was capable of such a thing, and that they didn't even think that it would occur to her to get someone else involved with a knife. But guess what? They didn't fire her. They told me to go back to the restaurant so that she could apologize to me because they were afraid that I was going to press charges and that the hookah lounge would suffer. And I went back to the hookah lounge because I didn't want to lose my job, and I thought, you know what? I'll just accept her apology and that'll be it. She was begging me for forgiveness. She cried and she told me that she wishes she never said anything to me and that she thought I was very pretty and that she apologized for getting Mark involved. Mark didn't say anything to me and he didn't get fired. Neither of them did. I quit.
Story time about how my online boyfriend hired a hitman off the dark web to kill me. I've always been a big PC gamer. When I was in high school, all I did was go to school, come home, and stay up way too late on my PC. It was like an escape for me, and it was something that I really enjoyed. I was also one of those kids that dated online instead of in real life. I would usually block guys that would hit on me, but there was one that stood out. We met in a game and worked well together, so I decided to add him. He was really nice, always made me laugh, and he was a brilliant player. We got so close I gave him my phone number and added him on social media. One thing led to another and we started dating, even though we never actually met in person, although we were planning to. Things were going great until he started to get controlling. If I wanted to hang out with my friends in real life and skip a day in my room online, he would get mad. He would force me to FaceTime him when I was with my friends to make sure I wasn't with any guys. He demanded that I share my location with him at all times, and to give him all my passwords to my social media accounts, even my iCloud. When I finally stood my ground and told him no, he freaked out on me, which made me realize that this was heading south quickly. I told him I was starting to think that this might not work out between us. This is when things got crazy and he started threatening me. part 2 of how my online boyfriend hired a hitman off the dark web to kill me. My online boyfriend continued to get more and more controlling. He told me to keep my webcam on 24/7 even when I was asleep or wasn't home. He wanted to know exactly what I was doing at every moment of the day. This is when I finally made it clear that I wanted to break up, and he went ballistic. He told me he knows where I live and he's going to show up at my house. When that didn't keep me around and I stopped talking to him, his threats kept getting more and more serious. He threatened to leak my private photos online if I didn't stay with him. I still refused, which made him even angrier. He told me he has connections online and he could ruin my life if he wants to. He also told me that if I leave him, he'll make sure that I regret it. I blocked him on everything and changed my number. A few months passed and I hadn't heard anything from him. One morning I woke up and had a bunch of missed calls and text messages from my online group of friends. They were freaking out asking me if I heard what happened to my ex. It turns out he got arrested for trying to hire a hitman on the dark web. They sent me links to a few small news articles about him confirming it, and I was horrified. The person he was trying to get assassinated was never confirmed, but I'm almost certain that it was me.
I had just moved into my first apartment with my boyfriend. On move-in day, my boyfriend was working, so I started moving things alone. I noticed my neighbor, who is a man probably in his late 60s, was watching me the entire time, so I waved as I was going into my apartment. When I walked out of my apartment, he was standing outside my door and said, "I guess I should have helped you." That was the last encounter I had for about a week. My boyfriend had never seen this man, so I assumed he believed that I lived by myself. My next encounter, it was about 11 p.m. and I took my dog outside to go potty. I looked up and the same man was watching me from his blinds. I was extremely creeped out, so I looked away and tried to get my dog to hurry up. I looked at his blinds again and he was no longer there. About 30 seconds later, my dog started to freak out and lunge. So I looked and the man came outside. The first thing he said is, "I just wanted to let you know I walked into your apartment." My friend used to live here and I got confused. He stumbled over his words and got into his car. My boyfriend was in the living room before I took the dog outside, so I rushed inside to talk to him. He immediately started talking about it. He said this man opened the door and began to walk in, but they made eye contact. As soon as he saw my boyfriend, he hurried and shut the door and went to talk to me. I haven't had an experience since the last time I saw him, but from everything that has happened, it's easy to assume that this man thought I lived alone and was planning on waiting for me in my apartment. And that is the end of my...
This story time is how my boyfriend got my sister pregnant. At the time, I just graduated college and I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend. My sister at the time was 2 years younger than me, and she was still in college, but she ended up dropping out because she said school wasn't for her anymore. My parents were upset that they had paid for school and she dropped out in the middle of it, so they kicked her out, and me being the older sister, I let her live with me and my boyfriend until she got back on her feet. My sister was also depressed at the time, but me and my boyfriend would always cheer her up. As weeks went by, she ended up getting a job at Target, and she helped pay for some of the bills towards the apartment. One day when she gets back from work, she comes into my room saying that she wasn't feeling well and just passed out. She wasn't waking up, so I took her to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, they told us that she was pregnant. This is part 2 on how my boyfriend got my sister pregnant. So like I said earlier, my sister passed out and I took her to the hospital, and come to find out she was pregnant. I was happy for her, of course, but she never told me she was seeing anyone. When we got back home, I asked her, "So who the baby daddy?" She jumps and she's just like, some guy from school. I said, "Some guy got you pregnant?" And I bust out laughing. She told me it wasn't funny. Then I asked, "So who is he?" She said, "We don't talk no more," and ran into her room. I let it go, but I noticed something was weird. Couple weeks later, one night my boyfriend leaves our room to go to my sister's. I get up and I listen on to the conversation, and he's basically trying to convince her to get an abortion. So I walk into the room very upset, and I ask him, why is he trying to convince her to get an abortion? And I notice he's giving her a stack of money. Part 3 of how my boyfriend got my sister pregnant. So I walked into my sister's room, and my boyfriend is handing her a stack of money, telling her she should get an abortion. I start yelling, "What are you doing?" My boyfriend says he's just helping her out. I scream, "Why are you trying to have her get an abortion?" Then my sister interrupts and says, "We need to tell her." She looks at my boyfriend. I'm just like, what's going on? She tells my boyfriend, "We gotta tell her." I'm like, "Tell me what?" My boyfriend says, "Nothing. There's nothing to tell you." My sister just says straight up, the baby is his. I sit there for a second, and then out of nowhere, I just black out. I attacked him until my sister pulled me off. I went to our room. I packed up my things. I took my boyfriend's clothes, put them into a tub, poured bleach on them, grabbed my things, and left. A couple months later, my sister had the baby. It's now been 2 years, and I still haven't spoken to either my sister or my ex-boyfriend.
This story time is how I caught my uncle filling on my cousin, in other terms, his daughter. So when I was 11, my cousin was throwing a party, then afterwards a sleepover. By the way, we're calling her Adrian, and she was turning 13. So the day of the party, me and my other sister were dropped off by my dad, and we were dropped off very early, maybe 5 hours before the party, and that's because he had to go to work, and my uncle didn't mind taking us all together to the party. Plus, we got to help them set up for the party. When we arrived, we went to Adrian's room, and she got her hair done. It looked so good. When we were talking to her, she just seemed so sad. And you know, when you're younger, you can tell when things are off. She seemed bratty, and she would say that she hated her mom and her dad. To me, I'm like, why? She has the perfect life. Fast forward, she throws the party, and when it's all over, we go back to her house for the slumber party. We ate snacks, played games, watched movies till we fell asleep. I'm a light sleeper, and when everyone was asleep, my uncle came in the living room, tapped on Adrian's shoulder, and told her she gotta go to sleep in her bed tonight. Let me know if I should. This is part 2 of how I caught my uncle touching on my cousin, in other terms, his daughter. So early before, I told you guys everyone went to sleep. We were all asleep in the living room floor in front of the TV, and my uncle tapped on Adrian, telling her that she needed to sleep in her bed tonight. I'm a light sleeper, and I was woke the whole time. Adrian was still asleep, so my uncle picked her up and took her to her room. I was confused on why she had to go to sleep in her room because everyone was asleep downstairs. So 15 minutes passed. I'm still waiting there bored. I don't know what came to me, but I was just curious to see if Adrian was up. I mean, she might have been because I would have woke up if I was switched to a new room. I don't know. I just went up. When I got upstairs, I opened the door. Adrian was asleep, but she was completely naked, and my uncle was sitting right next to her, touching on her. This is part 3 of how I caught my uncle touching on my cousin, in other terms, his daughter. Like I said, I couldn't sleep, so I went upstairs to see if Adrian was up. When I opened up the door, Adrian was asleep, but she was naked, and my uncle was touching on her. I got scared and was about to run downstairs, but he ran after me, covered up my mouth, and sat me back down in the room. I started crying, and he said if I didn't shut up, he was going to beat me, so I shut right up. In the midst of it all, when he was standing up, I didn't notice before, but he had on no pants. I started sniffling, and the noise I was making had woke Adrian up. She looked at me, then looked at herself and saw that she had on no clothes. She jumped back and immediately wrapped herself up in a blanket. I started crying again, and my uncle said, "If you don't shut up, girl, I'm going to smack you." Then Adrian yelled at him and said, "Don't hurt her." And immediately he popped her and said, "What I tell you about talking back?" And from there, Adrian just sat there frozen, touching her face, and I shut right up. This is part 4 of how I caught my uncle touching my cousin, in other terms, his daughter. So, after my uncle popped Adrian, she got real quiet. Then out of nowhere, she started burst out crying. My uncle was trying to tell her to be quiet, but she just got louder. I don't know what it was, but as soon as I saw her crying, I started crying too. Immediately, Adrian's mom busted in the room asking what's going on. My uncle was trying to convince her that everything was okay. She grabbed Adrian and saw that she was naked. Adrian's mom started to get upset. At this point, everyone was waking up. She took both me and Adrian out of the room and yelled at my uncle, telling him to throw his clothes on and go. We went to the bathroom and she asked us questions. I told her what I saw, and Adrian told her everything, even things I didn't even heard about. It seemed like her mom had speculations that this was all going on, and her mom started crying. Towards the end, I really don't know what they did afterwards. I told my dad, and from there, me and my sister was never allowed over my cousin's house, and I haven't seen her in 8 years.